In this next episode of our Promised Land series, we visit the ancient fortress of Masada, where all hope for Jewish sovereignty over the land God promised Israel seemed to be lost. From beginning to end, the Bible tells the story of an everlasting covenant God made with the people of Israel, a covenant that was made with Abraham over 4,000 years ago. This covenant involved a chosen people, Abraham's descendants through Isaac and Jacob, and a chosen land where the people of Israel would live as a nation. Throughout this series, we have explored various places in the Promised Land that are significant in the incredible story of the Bible, discovering how God was faithful to keep every promise He made, bringing His people to inherit the land. But there were times when, because of Israel's enemies and sometimes because of Israel's failure to keep her end of the covenant, Israel was exiled from the land God promised them. When the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BC, the Jewish people were sent into exile, but they returned not long after, as God promised they would. But today, I want to take you back in time to the 1st century, when Jewish sovereignty in the Promised Land once again was threatened and all hope seemed lost. But did God break His promises to Israel? Was the everlasting covenant He made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob broken? And were the many prophecies about Israel's destiny in this land just empty words that no longer applied? Today, I invite you to the fortress of Masada to learn about the tragic end of Jewish sovereignty, to see the archaeology that tells this sad story, and to learn about an incredible archaeological discovery here that reminds us of God's unrelenting faithfulness to His people. As Isaac and I neared the end of our quest to visit all the most significant locations in the Promised Land, we were compelled to visit the fortress of Masada. Although this location is not prominent in the Bible, it holds so much significance for Israel and is an incredible reminder that God keeps all His promises to them, even when all hope seems lost. Well, Isaac, as we travel around Israel, bring people here to visit, we visit lots of special places, but I don't know if there's any quite as historic and special as this one. Tell me where we are.
Right now, we are on top of Masada.
Yeah.
Very famous, very important site that we have here in the Judean desert by the Dead Sea.
Now, Masada has an incredible story behind it. But before we get to the sort of the final story, talk to me a little bit about the background of this place. Where do we first hear about it? Who all comes here?
So, Masada is mentioned quite a few times in the history. First, we learn about the Hashmoneans. They were the first ones to build some fortifications on top of this mountain. And later on, of course, we hear a lot about King Herod. Herod built here a very strong fortress. He was clever enough to solve the problem of water and food supply to his fortress. He also built here an amazing winter palace, although never ever. He did not come here, he didn't have time to enjoy the place, but still, he had a wonderful winter palace. And later on, we find the sad, tragic story about the bitter end of the zealots of Masada.
Now, you mentioned the story of the bitter end here at Masada. Get us some background. Give us the events leading up to why this group of Jewish people ended up on top of the mountain here.
During the time of the Second Temple, Judaism was not one unit. In those days, we learn about many sects. There were sects of more zealots, there were sects of less zealots. 66 AD, beginning of the big Jewish revolt against the Romans. In Jerusalem, there was a sect of zealots called the Sicaries. They decided not to fight against the Romans. So they left Jerusalem and came here to Masada. Remember, at that time, the place was abandoned. Okay. So they came here, took this place, and lived here peacefully, far away from Jerusalem, far away from the eyes of the Romans. 4 years later, end of the big revolt, when the Romans occupied Jerusalem. When the Romans occupied Jerusalem, they called everybody. Josephus Flavius, the greatest historian of the Roman era, wrote in his book that in 70 AD, for the very last few Jews who managed to stay alive, they ran away from Jerusalem, and then they escaped to the desert and joined the Sicaries here on top of this mountain, because this was the last only safe place in this country for them. So Masada became to be as the last stronghold of the zealots here in the land of Israel. Josephus informed us about 967 zealots who lived here. This number included men, women, and children. Everything was good and nice until the end of 72 AD. End of 72 AD, the Romans say to themselves, okay, 3 years ago we defeated the Jews, but nowadays we still have one more problem here, and the name of our last problem is Masada. We still have another 967 more Jews living in Masada. What we can do if one day they will leave Masada? They can go back to Jerusalem, or even worse, back to Galilee, and they can start a new revolt against us. So the Romans decided to come to Masada, to capture Masada, to kill all of the 967 Jews who lived here in order to finish all of their problems here in the land of Israel.
So to give people some perspective who are watching, tell them about the mountain and what are the access points? How do you get in? How do you get out?
So this is a very high mountain. Remember that right now we are 1,400 feet above the level of the Dead Sea. Only way to reach top of the mountain was to take the snake path that was built by King Herod, extremely steep, narrow, and difficult path on the eastern side of the mountain. So it climbed from the top, from the foot all the way to the top of this mountain. This was the one and only way to make it to the top of Masada.
So one way in, one way out. So all the Romans really had to do was sit at the bottom and wait.
Yes, because the Romans, when they came here, they saw how narrow and how steep was the snake path. When they saw how strong was the wall around Masada, they said there is no way how we can climb up with all of our equipment, war machines and weapons, the snake path. So they said, we have time. We will sit down at the bottom around Masada. We put Masada under siege and we wait until the zealots up there will run out of water and food. Sooner or later, they will run out of water and food. They will have to come out. They will have to give themselves into our hands. We are going to kill them. So Josephus wrote that in order to put Masada under a siege down at the bottom around this mountain, the Romans built 8 camps and connected them with a siege wall.
So they're waiting at the bottom, but this group of people, they were fairly well prepared.
Yes.
Tell me about the water, the food situation.
Remember, Herod was the one who built an amazing system to store water in huge water cisterns on the upper part of this mountain. What he did, he channeled flash floods, waters from the canyon surrounding us into water cisterns. We are talking about tens of thousands of gallons of water that they could store in these cisterns. And here on top of the mountain, Herod prepared lots of storage rooms for the food. We know that during the time of the Roman siege, the water cisterns were full with tens of thousands of gallons of water. In the warehouses, they had 400 tons of food.
Wow.
Josephus wrote that the Roman siege did not bother them. They had enough water and enough food that they could live 3 more years under a siege. At some point, the Romans down at the bottom, they started to experience some serious difficulties with their water and food supply, which means at some point the Romans realized that their siege did not bother the zealots who lived here on top of Masada.
Okay, so when they start running into problems, they sort of get impatient, and then what do they do in order to sort of put pressure on the situation here on the top of the mountain?
On the western side of the mountain, they began to build a ramp all the way from the foot to the top of the mountain. It took them 9 months to build this ramp. 9 months later, they finished to build the ramp. What the Romans did, they brought their war machine all the way to the top of the ramp, to the western wall of Masada, and with the war machine, they started to bang on the wall until at some point they managed to make a big opening in the wall, what we call the breaking point. Now, when the zealots saw that, they tried to block this breaking point. Josephus wrote that the roofs of all of the houses were made out of wood. So the zealots brought every single piece of wood that they could find to block this breaking point. When the Romans saw that, they laughed. They said, wood, something that we can burn. So Josephus wrote in his book that in one of the afternoons, when the wind came from the west to the east, the Romans came with torches and fire and started to burn the wood. So a few hours later, when the night came, breaking point, the wall, everything was on fire. So the zealots understood that within a few more hours, when the morning will come, breaking point will be open again. And then no way, no chance how they could stop from these 7,000 Roman soldiers from entering Masada.
Wow.
Don't go away. When we come back, we learn about the tragic end of this Jewish stronghold in the Promised Land and the profound symbol of resilience and hope it has become for Israel today.
As I travel across the nation of Israel today, I see a traumatized people, a country torn apart by terror and an existential war, a nation that needs to be restored and rebuilt. But as I visit the many ministries here that First Century Foundations has been supporting over the past 40 years, my heart is filled with hope.
I would like to say thank you to all the supporters of First Century Foundation, because your support helps us here in our country. Thank you.
Call the number on your screen now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit firstcenturyfoundations.com to become a new partner at $30 a month or more. And as a thank you, you will receive the CD, DVD, Blu-ray combo, We Pray for Peace, a visual journey through Israel.
Your generosity enables First Century Foundations to make a huge difference in the land of Israel.
It was amazing to visit the fortress of Masada with Isaac. Looking below and seeing the remains of the 2,000-year-old ramp built by the Romans to penetrate this stronghold never ceases to send chills up my spine. This last Jewish stronghold in the Promised Land held on for a long time, but ultimately it was defeated.
So now it's kind of the critical moment. Tell us about the end. And you know, we have all of this archaeological evidence here that we're seeing all of the ruins, but there's some very special archaeological evidence that helps us understand the end of the story.
The building that you see here is the synagogue. During that night, the leader of the zealots, Elazar ben Yair, gathered the people most probably here in this plaza that you see in front of the entrance to the synagogue. Most scholars believe that he climbed up to the roof and gave the people speech. In his speech, he convinced all of them to commit suicide. Said, anyhow, if you wait till the morning, Romans will come here, they will rape our wives and children, they will kill them and us as well. Only thing that we can do right now is, let's commit suicide. At least we all know that we will die as a free, unabused people. And they accepted what he said. They understood only solution was to commit suicide. So from here they went and committed the suicide. Josephus wrote how? Josephus wrote that all of the men took knives, killed their own wives and children, and then when they stayed men only, they did something similar to the lottery tickets. Now, we did find these lottery tickets over there on the northern side of Masada, and over there they decided whom they were going to kill the first, who will be number 2, who will be number 3, etc., etc. When the last one stayed alive, he had to make sure that everyone was dead, and he committed suicide by himself. Josephus wrote that when this tragedy happened at that night, there were only 2 women and 5 children who succeeded to escape. So the next morning, when the Romans entered Masada, they met these 2 women and 5 children who told them the whole story.
Wow, wow.
What a tragedy.
It is a tragedy, but what a story of resilience as well. The will to not be conquered, but instead to take matters into their own hands. Now, this story has inspired every Jew since then. Tell us about how important Masada is to Israel and to the Jewish people.
Till today, Masada is known as a symbol of heroism in the Jewish faith. And until the 80s, in the army, all of us here in Israel, when we are 18 years old, we have to go to serve in the army, boys and girls. Now, as a boy, if you go to one of the best top elite commando units, first 1 year in the army, massive trainings. End of that year until the 80s, what the unit used to do, they used to march all the way from Jerusalem through the Judean desert with all of the equipment, all of their weapons on their back. This march take about 22, 23 hours through the desert, came to the foot of the mountain, climbed up the snake path, and gathered here in the synagogue to swear an oath to serve the state of Israel. And we say, we are willing to give our lives for the state of Israel. And when the soldiers said, I swear it, here we used to light inscription in fire that said, Masada shall not fall again. And Jeff and ladies and gentlemen, I can assure you that Masada shall never fall again. Never, ever.
Well, thank you so much, Isaac. This has been incredibly enlightening again, and I know helpful for our viewers at home. And what a phenomenal story.
Thank you.
Don't go away. When we come back, we learn about a 2,000-year-old Bible prophecy that was unearthed at Masada and discover how its words have come to pass here in the Promised Land.
On the streets of Tel Aviv, the struggle is real. Countless men and women battle homelessness and addiction, trapped in a cycle of despair. But hope is not lost. Through the Aviv Rehabilitation Center, lives are being restored. Just like Sergey, who has left the streets and now helps lead the center.
I want to thanks to all that make gifts to First Century Foundation that helps to change many lives here, lives like mine. Thank you very much.
When you become a new monthly partner for just $30 a month or more, you'll help provide food, shelter, and vital support to those in need. Call now 1-877-628-2800 or go to firstcenturyfoundations.com. And as a way of saying thank you, we'll send you We Pray for Peace, a stunning visual and musical journey through the land of Israel. Join us today and change a life.
When the last Jewish stand against the Romans came to a tragic end here, All hope seemed lost that the Jewish people would ever live as a free, sovereign nation in the land of Israel again. Yet here in the synagogue at Masada, a portion of the scroll of the prophet Ezekiel was buried, only to be unearthed 2,000 years later. And its ancient Hebrew words contained an incredible promise of hope.
Today on First Century Foundations, we diverge temporarily from our normal focus on biblical places and stories to talk about something that occurred between 72 to 73 CE. In the archives of human history, few events are as haunting and harrowing as the tragedy of Masada. Perched atop a rugged plateau overlooking the Dead Sea, Masada witnessed a dramatic and terrible culmination of Jewish sovereignty in Judea. It stands as a stark testament to the resilience and resolve of a people besieged by forces beyond their control. Here's a bit of the history. First, the history of Masada itself. We hear about this place as early as the time of King David. Psalm 18:2 speaks of David hiding from King Saul. He says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Now, in this psalm, he used the Hebrew word that literally means Masada, providing a fitting picture of the unshakable protection and strength of God. This fortress was first constructed by the Hasmoneans in between 37 and 31 BCE. Later, Herod the Great fortified Masada and built high walls, a system of water cisterns and storehouses. He had prepared it for a winter palace, but apparently he actually never stayed here. In 66 CE, when the First Jewish-Roman War was beginning, a group of Jewish extremists called the Sicarii overcame the garrison at Masada and settled here. Led by the Jewish patriot Elazar ben Yair, the 960 Jews that took refuge here soon found themselves under siege by the Romans for a period that lasted over 2 years. Drawing from the accounts of the Jewish historian Josephus Flavius, we peer into the mists of time and witness the final act of defiance against Roman oppression. Masada, once a symbol of Jewish strength and independence, became the stage for a desperate last stand against Rome. As Roman legions encircled the fortress, the fate of its inhabitants hung in the balance. Archaeology sheds further light on this somber chapter of history, unearthing the remnants of a civilization on the brink of oblivion. The silent stones of Masada bear witness to the courage of those who refuse to yield to tyranny, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Tragically, the Jews who took refuge on this magnificent fortress were ultimately defeated. Rome gained control over the land God had promised Israel, and all hope seemed lost that the Jewish people would ever have sovereignty over their beloved homeland again. Yet, God's promises that were literally buried in the ground on this fortress, were not dead. They would be resurrected 2,000 years later. Amidst the ruins of Masada in the ancient synagogue where I'm standing, discovered atop the plateau, fragments of scripture were found, including the Prophet Ezekiel's vision found in Ezekiel 37:11 through 13. Then he said to me, "Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, 'Our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off.' Therefore prophesy and say to them, 'This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you, and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord." The words discovered here resound with eerie significance. The vivid imagery of the Valley of Dry Bones is almost tangible here in the desert where such tragedy befell the Jewish people. And it reminds us of the Holocaust, when while Jews remained largely in exile even in modern times, the people experienced even more suffering and death. Yet Ezekiel's vision is full of hope. Israel would be brought back to the land of Israel. God would again resurrect this nation. All hope was not lost. In the darkest hour of exile and dispersion, there is a glimmer of hope, a promise of restoration and redemption. As we reflect on the tragedy of Masada, let us not dwell solely on the ruins of the past, but look to the horizon with hope and expectation. For just as the dry bones of Ezekiel's vision were brought back to life, so too the nation of Israel would be reborn. God kept his promises and brought the Jewish people back to the promised land. And with the rebirth of Israel in 1948, the dry bones came to life. Even in the shadow of despair, there is a flicker of hope that refuses to be extinguished. The promise of God to his chosen people endured like a shining light in the darkness. As the prophet Jeremiah declared, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." In the aftermath of Masada, as the diaspora spread them far and wide, it may have seemed that all was lost. Yet throughout the centuries, the Jewish people have endured, their faith undiminished by the trials of history. The resilience of the Jewish people serves as a testament to the enduring promise of God. Though they have known suffering and exile, they have also known triumph and renewal. The story of Masada is not merely one of tragedy, but also one of incredible resilience, of a people who refused to be defined by their circumstances. The tragedy of Masada is not the end of the story, but merely a chapter in a larger narrative of redemption and restoration. May we, like the ancient inhabitants of Masada, hold fast to our faith amidst adversity, knowing that God is faithful to his promises and that his plans for us are plans for hope and a future. Thank you for joining me today at the fortress of Masada, where it seemed as though all hope was lost, only to discover that God's promises, although literally buried here, would one day be resurrected. Please join me again next week as we continue to see the faithfulness of God to Israel right here in the Promised Land.
The nation of Israel is continuing to defend themselves against a rising tide of terror and anti-Semitism. However, Israel and the Jewish people are not alone. First Century Foundations has been actively supporting the people of Israel for nearly 40 years, providing food, clothing, and shelter for those in need, especially in these desperate times. When you give a gift of $30 or more, you are not only helping support the people of Israel, you are also showing that you care and are blessing God's chosen people in their hour of need. And when you give your gift, as a thank you, you will receive the bi-monthly newsletter and Israel Prayer Watch. And for monthly donations, we will send you the book, Praying for the Peace of Jerusalem. Call now, 1-877-628-2800, or visit us online at firstcenturyfoundations.com and help the people of Israel during these dangerous times.